Hey friends, welcome to the Under the Covers channel. I'm Francesca, your go-to for all things romance, fantasy, and paranormal book recommendations. So if you're into swoony heroes, epic worlds, and books that are going to make you feel something, you're in the right place. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss your next favorite read. Today I'm going to be talking about fantasy series that you can hibernate with this winter because they are fully completed series. Some are newer than others, and some I actually consider classics that you must read in the genre. So I'm excited to recommend these series to you. Hopefully you find something on this list that you can get lost in and binge right through them this winter season. So if you want your winter hibernation to have a dose of steamy romance, dark magic, and slow burn tension that just hurts so good, I guarantee that these worlds are going to keep you turning those pages. So if you're ready for the recommendations, let's just dive right in. I feel that fantasy is perfect to read in the winter, especially some of the darker, like heavier kind of fantasies with some political intrigue and all of those kind of elements. So, some of the books that I'm going to talk about here today are straight fantasy romance, and some are fantasy with romantic elements in them. So, the first one is actually what I would consider a classic in the fantasy romance genre, and that is the Tairen Soul series by C.L. Wilson. The first book is Lord of the Fading Lands, and there are five books in this series. Now, why I think this is classic in the fantasy romance genre is the fact that this book was one of the first that really took a fantasy with romantic elements and really pushed the romance to the forefront. That hadn't really been done at the time, so I would consider this one of the pioneers in the genre. So it's a series that's a must read. Now, you can think of it like very epic fantasy romance with fated mates. It has powerful magic. It has a shifter fae hero, and also that very protective alpha kind of romance, also slow burn. This one has all of the things that you could love if you like fantasy romance. And again, it's a classic, it's a must read. So, the basis of the story is that we have a powerful torture fae king, and he's basically losing control of his magic. So he is turning into a mythical beast. That's where the shifter part comes in. And he's desperate to save his people. And while doing that, he stumbles across the heroine of the story, who's a very sheltered and shy girl. And turns out that she's his fated mate. It's like an immediate connection. And he is very alpha and powerful. So he has to struggle with that aspect of his own being. And the heroine is very shy and very quiet, but she also has magic of her own that she has to grow through in this first book. So you see that relationship building while she is growing, and he has to learn to give her space for that and to kind of rein himself in and change some of the things about his own self. And some of that stuff for him comes from trauma as well, past trauma that he has to deal with. It's a really lush story also in terms of storytelling. I think all of the books that I'm going to be talking about here today are very lush storytelling. But this one, it has like a very deep magical lore. The take on the fated mates is a soul bond, which I think is really interesting concept how the author did that. It deals with healing and vulnerabilities of both of the characters through the bond. If you like also fake courts and some darker magic elements, the stakes are also pretty high in this series. So this one is perfect for that. It's quite emotionally intense, and I think you're going to really love it. C.L. Wilson in general is an author that you should be reading if you read fantasy romance. She has this whole series, but also she has other books and other series that you can check out as well. Now, the second book is also one that I consider, or series. This is a trilogy, and it's the Kushiel's Legacy series or trilogy by Jacqueline Carey. This is a completed trilogy, but there are other trilogies that are in the same world. You don't have to read those. These are my chunky books. These are pretty chunky books. So if you want a very chunky fantasy to read for winter, this is it. This is the one. Also, this is very dark fantasy. It has political intrigue. It has a slow burn romance, like the slow burn romance of all slow burn romances. And it deals also with BDSM elements. It has some epic world building and lots of court intrigue, lots of morally gray and morally complex characters. This first trilogy follows our heroine, Fedra. And Fedra is kind of like not a typical fantasy heroine. She's trained as a courtesan and a spy. And the world is very inspired by Renaissance Europe. In this world, they are trained or they are basically serving different gods. So by serving different gods, they have different lifestyles and different convictions of how they live their lives. And our heroine has been divinely marked by God or her God to serve by experiencing both pleasure and pain as one. And that is where her job is to be a courtesan in basically BDSM environments or scenarios that are presented. So she's experiencing both of those, and it's a divine or spiritual thing. And the romance, when I talk about like epic romances and epic couples, this is one of my top three for sure, maybe my top one. So the hero's Jocelyn. He's a very stoic bodyguard that is assigned to protect her. And he is the complete opposite of her. He serves a different god, and he has taken a vow of celibacy. So he's the polar opposite of her, but he is so loyal, and he has this very like, he would fight and die for her, not only because that is the mandate of his God in his job, but also because of the connection that develops between them, even though she is the everything that he's learned to despise in terms of how people should live their lives. So there's a lot of angst and a lot of polar opposites attract in this story. And she's navigating all of this sensuality through her work, which is literally sacred. And on his side, he really has to navigate his conflicting feelings on how he feels for her and how he has to protect her in those scenarios too, while being part of those scenarios. And of course, the world building is just really rich, amazing. There's lots of court politics, secret societies, there's some epic quests. There's also lots of betrayal and real danger. So the stakes are super high in this series. The characters go through a lot of stuff, and lots of twists and turns. And definitely, you might need like a little bit of a break between them because some of them can be intense and heavy. But again, there's only three books, so you can take a slight break if you don't want to binge right through them. But I think that they are so worth it. Definitely ones that I highly recommend. The third one is the Flesh and Fire series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. So, if you have heard, I'm sure you've heard of Jennifer L. Armentrout, but the Flesh and Fire series is an actually completed series and is the prequel to the From Blood and Ash series. So, if you haven't read the From Blood and Ash and that is not finished, you could read the prequel. This one is finished, and you can just binge right through this one, and you could go into From Blood and Ash. So, this one is fantasy romance. So, this is a true romantasy, and enemies to lovers. It has gods, it had vampires, and very broody hero. It has slow burn romance. Now, in comparison to From Blood and Ash, if you have read that, this one is more fantasy heavy, and it does involve like darker mythology and gods. So we have our heroine Syrah, and she is the chosen one, sacrificial chosen one, and she has to keep a super dark god imprisoned. But then that god, the primordial of death, and he's not only waking up, but he's very much involved in everything that's happening around her, around our heroine. He's very broody, he's powerful, and very emotionally complex, and more so than you're going to find from the beginning. So you're going to explore that as you read the series. There's lots of tension between them as well. If you like the kind of heroes where they're very protective, but also they're the problem, then this is going to be a good one for you. It has enemies to lovers, it has forced proximity, and it has a bit of forbidden romance as well. And of course, vampires and gods. So you can't go wrong there. Also, I think Jennifer Armentrout has a really great signature and addictive storytelling vibe to her stories. So any book that you pick up by her is going to be great. She has lots of fantasy books, lots of paranormal books. So it's an author that you could dive into her whole backlist during winter, and you're going to be perfect. Now, the next series is the Fate and Flame series by K.A. Tucker. This one is also 4 books. This was recently completed in 2024, so the last book just came out. And this one is a portal fantasy. It has slow burn romance, it has political intrigue, it has some quite complex characters as well, and a strong heroine plus the broody prince hero. So in this one, we have a heroine from modern day, and there is a reason why she's chosen from modern day and transported into this fantasy world, which is very medieval fantasy inspired. And she's basically finding herself with a task of something that she's been transported there for. She didn't want to do that, but she just finds herself here. And now she is in the body of the wife of the prince who just recently tried to kill him. So she's in a body that has some trouble coming for her. But at the same time, the hero, which is the prince, he is very conflicted with his relationship with his wife. He doesn't really know whether to trust her or not, but there's this push and pull relationship between them because he kind of wants to protect her, but he's also very ruthless. So she also has to navigate what are the secrets, what's going on around her, so she can do what she came here to do, so she can leave. But at the same time, things are never what they seem. So she has to kind of navigate a lot of political intrigue and secrets and that kind of stuff to get her bearings and save herself too, because of course there's danger looming around every corner. So world building is also really rich, and there's elemental magic, there's curses, there's lots of power dynamics in the kingdom, and all of that is things that she has to navigate through. And the slow burn romance builds between her and the prince throughout the 4 books. So it's very immersive and very intense. So I think if you want something that's very character focused, this is going to be a great series for that. And then the last series that I have for you guys, this one is the longer series of all of them. So this one actually has 12 books. And it is also another one like the Jacqueline Carey. It's more fantasy with romantic elements. That is the Black Jewels series by Anne Bishop. Now, Anne Bishop is an author that I absolutely love. She also writes some urban fantasy, which is really dark and intense and really good. So the first book in this series is Daughter of the Blood. And the Black Jewel series in general is very dark fantasy. It has found family, has very powerful women. So if you're looking for a fantasy with some kick-ass heroines, this is going to be the one for you. Also has very complex magic, dark fae, some emotional relationships throughout the series as well. It does deal with some trauma throughout the series, so you may want to check some of the trigger warnings. Again, it's dark fantasy, so when you're dealing with that, you may want to check some trigger warnings for that. The series basically kicks off in this first book with a prophecy about a queen who is either going to save the world or destroy it. And we have our heroine, who was a young girl that was prophesied to basically be the most powerful witch in existence, but she's also very broken in many ways because this world is very brutal. So surviving it is hard. So she is mentored by Satan, which is literally the Lord of Hell. And Satan is this very morally gray father figure to her, but he's very protective. And then there's the Dark Prince, Damon, and he's got very like dark powers and all of that, but he's also obsessed and has this soul deep connection to our heroine. And it's basically like a version of Fated Mates, but in a very spiritual, kind of raw emotional level, which is really interesting and really intense. So the world here is all about dark magic, fae-like courts, and lots of power struggles and power dynamics. But at the core of all of these stories, there's a lot of healing and found family and surviving trauma and thriving after that. So I think it has very beautiful storytelling and also kind of like relationships that are really going to emotionally wreck you when you're reading them and probably make you cry and sob a little bit, but all in a good way. So there you have it. Those are the 5 fantasy series that I think that you can get lost in this winter. Whether you want a lush fantasy romance like the Tairen Soul series, or dark political intrigue like in Kushiel's Legacy or A Fate of Flame, or even if you want something very emotional and immersive like the Flesh and Fire or the Black Jewel series. I think that there's something here for everyone. Let me know in the comments what is your go-to winter hibernation series, or if you have any completed fantasy series that you would recommend. Also, let me know if you've read any of the ones that I've talked about in this video and what you thought of them. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our videos, and be sure to subscribe to our free Substack so you don't miss any of our content across all platforms. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye!